Good afternoon and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programming to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where your team needs it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA. In today's program, members of NCIA's Marketing and Advertising Committee will present a session entitled From Subculture to Pop Culture, Creating a Culturally Relevant Cannabis Brand, in which they'll discuss what it takes to become a culturally relevant brand through authentic brand examples, all presented by the industry marketing experts who built them. As the industry continues transition from the margins to the mainstream, cannabis brands need to reach wider audiences. And after participating in today's program, you'll understand the various risks and rewards of joining cultural conversations, along with specific considerations for both cannabis and CBD brands. Well, I know our panel is eager to dive into today's discussion, and our audience members are interested in having all their questions answered along the way. So let's not waste any more time. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome back our moderator for today's session, Allison Disney, Partner for Business Strategy at Receptor Brands, to the virtual stage to kick things off by introducing our panel of cannabis marketing and branding experts. Welcome back to NCIA's Industry Essentials, Allison. You can activate your video feed as you just did and take it away from here. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Brian. And thanks again to the Marketing Advertising Committee for sponsoring today's content. I'm super excited to talk to this panel about creating culturally relevant cannabis brands and what that means as this category goes from subculture to pop culture and all of the complexities of the growth in this industry. But before we get started, just wanted to ground everyone in what do we mean by a culturally relevant brand. So for the purposes of today's conversation, we're talking about brands that align with cultural events or promote trends that shape and inform today's culture. So that could be supporting social issues or joining social conversations, but finding that intersection between a brand's purpose and how it can remain relevant to its audiences in doing so. And why are culturally relevant brands important? Well, this is just one data point to support why we're having this conversation today. But Twitter in 2019 launched a study to understand the impact of culture on marketing and brands and consumer behavior. And they found that a brand's cultural involvement makes up a full 25% of a consumer's purchase decision, proving that the cultural relevance of your brand doesn't only inform the sentiment of your brand with consumers, but it can also impact your business and your business outcomes in terms of how people perceive your brand and its fit into the cultural context. So without further ado, I would love to get our panelists to join this discussion. We have a really standout group today representing cannabis and CBD brands from coast to coast in this industry. To begin, we'll speak with Alexis Mora, the head of marketing from the Harborside Group. We also have joining us today Dana Mason, the brand director for Good News and Mindy's Edibles at Cresco Labs, and Tara Rosolowski, the VP of Beverages and Edibles from Cannabis Growth Corporation. So thank you all for joining us today. Really excited to dig into this very complex but relevant conversation for cannabis today. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Nice to see so much action on the chat already. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, keep your questions coming. We will definitely have a portion dedicated to audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion. But if you have anything timely based on the panelist conversation today, make sure to drop it into that chat or into the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to as many questions as we can. Well, to get the conversation started, Alexis, I'd love to start with you. If you could just share a little bit about Harborside and the work you're doing there and why you feel like it's important for your brand to be culturally relevant in the cannabis category and a little bit of what you've learned along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Allison, and thank you everybody for joining us today. As mentioned, my name is Alexis and I am the head of marketing for the Harborside Group. The Harborside Group was actually established back in 2006, so we are considered one of the OG cannabis companies in this space. Since then, we've become vertically integrated. So we've got 4 retail locations, soon to be 5 across California. We have a manufacturing facility here in Salinas as well. And we have 2 of our in-house brands, which is Key Cannabis and Harborside Farm. So it's been quite the journey since 2006. That being said, we are still dedicated to our original mission of being really thought leaders and movers and shakers in the space, with a dedication to have safe access to cannabis for all. So in terms of a little of context, I mean, we're the 2nd oldest dispensary here in California, and we also sold the first legal gram of cannabis in the state. So this is something that's really important to us in terms of our mission and our values in terms of safe accessibility as the industry continues to grow and is shaped. Beautiful. So I think last year in 2020 clearly was a doozy for everybody, and it left a lot of brands trying to understand how do we respond to COVID, and how do we also respond to a lot of the civil unrest that we were seeing within the country. At that time, as I mentioned, we have always considered ourselves advocates in the space. And so it left a lot of us kind of thinking about how we could fight for cannabis as an essential service is really where that started. Now, back in 2006, when we started, cannabis in California was still medical. And so we've always had kind of a sweet spot specifically for the wellness component. And that's really what jump-started this ideation of our Cannabis Is campaign, which is now in season 4. And it really kind of struck to Harborside's core values and kind of got us back to basics of why we decided to get in the space to begin with. So a lot of it started with petitioning, our local government to make sure that cannabis was an essential service, particularly for those who access the plant for wellness purposes. But it also continued on kind of the conversation culturally, being an Oakland-based company, on who we're actually servicing and what communities we're speaking to. Now, as we've kind of grown, and for some of you who know, let's say the Last Prisoner Project is a sister nonprofit that we also work with. As new players are coming to the space, it was really important for us to make sure that folks that were purchasing the products also saw themselves represented in not only the brands, but also the products and the founders that were formulating some of their favorite brands. And so since then, we've launched Cannabis Is Diversity, Cannabis Is Love, Cannabis Is Wellness, which really was a highlight on BIPOC-owned brands and also wellness brands as well, which was so fascinating to kind of listen and have the opportunity to interview a lot of these creators and founders about why they got into cannabis. But I think also more importantly, what the barriers of entry were and how folks that are interested in the cannabis industry could also be successful from, people that have actually done it. Now, Allison, as you mentioned, for a lot of folks, the kind of cultural sensitivity around what brands are doing is really important. Authenticity is always going to be key. We've created a really great following here in California, particularly with Oakland. So it's always in our best interest to serve our local community. And so Cannabis Is, as a campaign, sought to do just that. We ended up creating, as you can see in some of the snapshots here, again, the testimonial series from some of these founders who have incredible stories. And I will say, I love being in the cannabis space. I'm sharing this panel with some phenomenal women, which I love to see. And so it's so interesting to kind of listen to really the why and the rationale of how people kind of got into it, in tandem with also fighting against, I think, this negative stigma that we have in the cannabis space in terms of being a legitimate industry, having legitimate players, but also having legitimate brands as well. And so we've kind of seen this growth over the last couple of years, which has been really fascinating to watch. But I do feel like it is kind of our responsibility, particularly as a retailer, to be able to give highlights to a lot of these brands. And so we always have kind of a full circle, if you will, in terms of our marketing campaigns, which means that, as a company, obviously we're hoping to be successful here, drive sales, give a platform for some of these brands, but we also want our partners and our community to win as well. And so in that kind of way, we've generated this campaign. Now we've got some folks from, again, Cannabis is Diversity here, in which we'll talk a little bit more about how we really put our money where our mouth is in terms of the industry, and kind of breaking down some barriers of entry for some of these brands and some of these folks of color. We also have brands that we've highlighted on a wellness perspective. And really for us, it's creating shelf space. It's having conversations and getting our consumers engaged with not only us as a brand, but also some of our brand partners. So we've done this by kind of educating folks again through the testimonial series, creating specific places in which our stores, if you want to shop, let's say BIPOC brands, if you want to support Asian known brands, if you want to support queer brands as an example, there is a place for you to do that here in our store. And not only that, it's always important for us to have a corporate social responsibility. That's that kind of full circle, full stack component that I'm talking about. As I mentioned, we'll kind of get into one of our bigger announcements for the end of the year, which I'm very, very excited about. But since then, we've also fundraised several $1,000s for the Oakland COVID Community Fund, which helped essentially do testing for folks here in Oakland and allow accessibility for that. We've also donated to 18 Million Rising, which is a Asian nonprofit based in Oakland as well, as a response to a lot of the, again, civil unrest, some of the hate crimes that we've seen over this last year. So again, it was important for us to kind of dig in, really speak to kind of our core values and be able to deliver that authentically to our audiences. Now, in this next slide, this is kind of, again, where this becomes full circle for us as an industry. You know, as I mentioned, we are based in Oakland, right? And so we want to make sure that a lot of our initiatives are inclusive, and we're thinking about kind of systematically how to help support not only our consumers, but the industry as a whole. This is a really unique space in which I think, you know, we're getting to really build the industry we want to see, which is so beautiful. And so, you know, the work doesn't end necessarily on just, you know, the consumer front and saying, hey, you know, be aware, you know, here's all the things that you could do from a consumer in terms of your buying power here in the space. But also, again, to put your money where your mouth is and making sure as an industry, we're putting forth different programs so that all of us can be successful in that way. And so we've decided to partner up with the Peralta Community College District, which encompasses Berkeley City College, College of Alameda, Laney College, and Merritt College, to jumpstart and build from the ground up a cannabis certification program. Essentially, what this allows us to do is really get folks within our local communities to be educated and become educated about the many different facets about cannabis, whether it be retail, manufacturing, cultivation, and basically provide them the tools and the certification to be able to be prepared once they get into this industry. Now, in addition to that, you know, with Harborside being kind of a local, you know, hub here in the city, we've also dedicated by the end of 2022 to do a internship and job placement program with those folks as well. So not only do you get to participate in the certification program, you also get to work at one of the forefront dispensaries and vertically integrated cannabis companies in the space to learn from thought leaders in the space and hopefully kind of find your path forward. So this is kind of where everything comes together. You know, the rubber really meets the road. And this was, again, a way for us to authentically, you know, connect with our customers and let them know that, you know, we're listening. I think that's one of the kind of biggest takeaways from a marketing perspective, is to always understand kind of your consumers' needs. You know, my company runs through, let's say, a unique selling proposition exercise, right? Where we're trying to understand what the consumer needs are, how we can uniquely meet those needs outside of what your competitors do. So this was, again, a really great way for us as the industry is growing, changing, there's new players, and certainly there's room for so many different folks in this space, but it was a way for us to kind of really go back to kind of our basics, our core values, and let people know what Harborside stands for. So super excited for all of these initiatives. Also really excited to share the stage with the fabulous panelists that I am. And thank you for kind of tuning in this morning.
Thank you, Alexis. That so many great announcements coming out of Harborside. You guys have been obviously very involved in the culture surrounding your retail locations, but also within the cannabis industry at large. Is there anything having joined sort of that diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation as a brand, are there any considerations or watch outs, you might advise our audience about as you kind of attempt your first foray into some of those conversations?
Yeah, I would say, where we're at, it's kind of an evolving space, right? I think if you were to ask marketers even 5 years ago, kind of what to do around some of these kind of social justice issues, social equity issues, you wouldn't have seen kind of the response that you did last year, even as an example. So I think it's more so, awareness is going to be important, but it doesn't just stop there, right? So when you're considering, how to move forward with something, I think one thing is, listen, right? Listen to what your customers, what your constituents are saying and needing, always coming from a place of authenticity. But beyond that, we figured, I think people are aware. I think people are aware. I think people are really tired. And so the question then becomes, what do you do about that? Now, every brand, based off of your branding, your core values, your mission, what have you, is going to have a unique take on what that is. But I would encourage folks, when considering this, right? Listen, understand that yes, there is an awareness component, certainly, right? There's power in storytelling, there's power in sharing certain experiences, but I think the expectation now from consumers is to now do. And so you've seen this last year, so many different companies, even like bigger box companies, make statements that maybe again 5 years ago would have been considered controversial, but I think now is considered the norm. So that's kind of my 2 cents, and really kind of where the thought process was when we were launching these campaigns, and really making sure that we were doing the work, and we will continue to do that. Marketers and brands, you won't always do things perfectly as much as you would like to, right? So when in doubt, or when feeling like, have I done this? Remember that it's always a continuous process of kind of building upon that and getting better, and being open and honest kind of with your consumers. So that's kind of my 2 cents there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'd love to hear from Dana next. Dana, you're the brand director for Good News brand and Mindy's Edibles at Cresco Labs. Both of your brands are sort of designed with passion points and the customer in mind, obviously, and how they relate to culture. Please share a program example with us, and share any key learnings you have that might compare or contrast with Alexis's key takeaways as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for having me. As Allison mentioned, I'm the brand director of Mindy's and Good News. And today I'm going to be talking about our Good News Pride program. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Good News, it's a cannabis brand that was really built to expand cannabis into life's most social moments. So anytime we try to understand when and how good news should show up, we look for moments that are inherently social, and we ask ourselves the question, does good news play a role in this moment? So as we thought about the month of Pride and Pride celebrations, we asked ourselves that same question, and this time it was a clear yes. So before I kind of go into the program itself, let's take a look at a quick video.
Hi, I'm Daiwan, and I'm a tattooer and a muralist. And this is how I'm sharing good news this Pride. I became an artist because I've always loved it. The inspiration behind my art is basically Mexicanism, Chicagoism, like Aztec history. As a brown queer cannabis user, I felt that this was a perfect project for me. The excitement of this project is to showcase that you can be proud of who you are. Together with love and compassion, I think we can make anything happen. I think we are louder together, brighter together, stronger together, and better together. This Pride, let's share good news and cannabis together.
Great. So as you go to the next slide, so that's where we ended, but let's talk a little bit about how we actually got there. Flip to the next slide. So it seems so easy when you go back and look at the video, but really how we ended there was based on a journey really based in strategy. So anytime you're looking to create a program that aligns and shapes today's culture, you must begin with one thing, which Alexis mentioned as well, which is the consumer. The consumer always goes first. And our consumer doesn't really care about terpenes or fancy strain names. What they're really looking for is good times with friends. So as we think about what that meant within the scope of Pride, we knew that there was a desire to come together so the good in us can shine, especially after a year when we couldn't physically be together. The next thing we look at is the cultural truth. So Pride started as an act of people coming together to resist oppression, and fueled by togetherness, it's now a time where we use our collective voice to celebrate diversity and progress while continuing to fight for human rights. So with that, we know that Pride is more than just plastering rainbows on packaging and disingenuous donations. And then finally, we revisit the brand and make sure that our initial hunch of is there relevance within this moment continues to be true. So for good news, this brand truth is that cannabis is made for life's most social moments and helps the good in us shine. And really, the best cultural programs are going to be framed at the intersection of all of these three truths to ensure authenticity for the consumer, the cultural moment, and the brand's role. So for Good News Pride, that meant forming this connection, and that in everything that we do within this program, we were aiming to celebrate Pride past, present, and future by bringing people together to use our collective voice for good. So let's take a look at how this carried out. So where did this end? So the first thing is we needed to reach your audience. So a little bit different than Alexis is Good News is a relatively new brand, and there's lots of people that haven't heard from us, especially around the topic of Pride. So it was really important for us to go to them to make it really easy for them to hear our message. So this meant impactful paid media ads, in bar TV ads, knowing that that was an occasion we wanted to extend ourselves to, and then targeting key influencers that had relevance within this program. Go to the next slide. We also wanted to create products that were perfect for the moment and very shareable. So we created sativa dominant products, both in our gummy form, which was an assorted sour pack. So again, laddering back to Pride, there was a flavor in there for everyone, as well as a punch flavored vape pen, both that were perfect for enhancing those Pride celebrations. Next slide. Then, of course, like Alexa said, it was important that in everything we did that we made an impact and that we were more than just providing lip service. So we partnered with local organizations that benefited the LGBTQIA+ community. So within Illinois, that was the Center on Halsted, and within our California market, that was the San Francisco LGBT Center. And all aspects of our program benefited programs within these organizations that really brought the community together and enhanced togetherness, is that's a really important proposition of Good News as a full brand. And we also drove awareness for these organizations and encouraged others to contribute to them as well. We also worked to create swag that helped encourage togetherness. So within our key market of Chicago, due to COVID, the typical Pride parade was moved to Pride in the Park. So we created these coolers, water bottles, blankets that Velcro together so you could hang out with friends and bring with them, as well as Polaroid cameras to capture the moment, that were all perfect for those Pride celebrations and really encouraged togetherness. And in our dispensaries, we actually gave away packs of 6 wristbands, all in different colors with different sayings, so that you could give them to friends. And while they were interesting apart, they were strongest and unified message when you brought them together. We also enhanced local celebrations through sponsorship of Eye Eater Society and Soho House events in Chicago, where we brought together nail art and friendship bracelets as some of our activations to encourage that aspect of togetherness. Next slide. And then finally, what you saw a little bit of before, we really wanted to find a way to bring the entire community together to actually brighten the community of Wrigleyville, where there was a lot of celebrations taking place. So we took over a storefront and worked with a muralist from the community to really put out this message of togetherness. And you'll notice that the branding is actually pretty minimal, because for us, it wasn't so important to get our brand out there, but rather to have the goodwill of allowing people the platform to share their good news, especially after a really difficult year. So let's take a look at what that looks like. That was a great program. And two of the most fun aspects of that were, one, we unveiled this and encouraged people to sign it the day before all of like the measures within social distancing were lifted within the Chicago community. So it was a great way to celebrate that. And this mural actually has been transferred to the Center on Halsted within Chicago and will live there. So it was a really great way to make an impact there that went beyond just our financial donation. So if you flip to the next slide, as we put this all together, what are the key takeaways and what did we learn? So very similar to some of what Alexis mentioned, but one, consumer first always. We let the consumer guide the program. The second takeaway is be authentic and don't force it. It needs to make sense for the consumer, the cultural moment, as well as the brand for it to work. 3, invite and engage. Don't talk at the consumer, but really allow for a two-way dialogue and for that active listening. And finally, make it easy. Allow us to come to the consumer, make it easy for them to participate and share with their friends, and make it easy for our customer and dispensary partners to celebrate with us as well. So again, thanks for having me, and I'll turn it back over to Allison.
Thanks, Dana. What a fantastic program, and just went live, I think, about a month or so ago. So as a Chicago local, really excited to see it kind of come to life before our eyes. Really quickly, before we transition to Tara, I just wanted to ask, is there anything in your experience in doing these sort of local programs and then looking at how you scale it to different regions that you've taken away in terms of future programs or key learnings in the execution?
Yeah, so I think the number one key learning is one, planning ahead. I always say, it's always really interesting with cannabis where you're not just doing something for the first time for the brand or the company, but oftentimes for the industry. So I'd say the number one key learning is being flexible and being patient with yourself and listening to the consumer and allowing the consumer to guide where that program goes and feeding off of where they're reacting, where they interest, and really plussing up and engaging there as well.
Great, thank you. Well, Tara, I'm really excited to talk to you about a different sort of side of the industry that we don't get to hear from as often at NCIA in our marketing and advertising committee conversations, and that is the CBD side of the category and segment. When you talk about launching brands in a culturally relevant way, there's a very broad national audience and competitive marketplace that you have to consider from a CBD standpoint. So can you tell us a little bit more about the brands that you've launched recently and why it was important to think through the launch of those brands from a cultural lens and how you connected to consumers with the introduction of these brands?
My pleasure. Thanks, Allison. And thanks again, everyone, for joining. And it was just such an honor, Dana and Alexis, to hear you speak. I hope I can kind of round out the conversation from a CBD and wellness lens. So I'll dive in. Again, Tara, I'm our Vice President of Beverages and Edibles at Canopy Growth. And speaking with you today is a real honor. To Allison's question, to build out the CBD context for cannabis and what we've spoken about so far today, I wanted to really define what success looks like in the CBD space and really how you can tell if your brand is, Allison, how did you put it, inside or outside of culture? I really want to hit on that. I'll start with what success looks like through the bias, of course, of Canopy Growth, success at Canopy Growth, success in our industry for CBD really means creating CBD and cannabis products. Obviously, we have THC-led solutions as well that meet consumers' needs, right? I think all of our presenters so far have said that in its simplicity. We're here to meet consumers' needs. Our vision at Canopy Growth is to unleash the power of cannabis to improve lives. I love the necessity of that. We actually literally have t-shirts that say, you know, from illegal to essential. And so if we're not moving in the trajectory of improving lives, we've literally missed the brief. So from a CBD perspective now, in a time when consumers, I think Alexis touched on this, right? At a time when consumers were searching for new ways to find balance and achieve calm more progressively in terms of the things we do for our health and wellness, Canopy Growth launched 2 fantastic brands where we partnered with lifestyle icons to get us into the conversation. Not that we didn't think we could get that cultural relevance on our own, but we literally wanted to, in addition, partner with some of these titans in these conversations with key audiences that we wanted to be a part of. And so those 2 brands, some of them are behind my head, my decorated home office. The first is Martha Stewart CBD. You may have heard about Martha Stewart CBD. Canopy Growth obviously is the brand owner, but I assure you, my connection with Martha is second to none in my career. And Martha co-developed, designed all of these products herself, often with flavor types, like literally right out of her garden. And so that brings a cultural relevance through the entire value chain, right? And so I'll dig into both of those, but Martha Stewart CBD being our titan, if you will, of health and wellness and bringing that cultural relevance into CBD via that brand. And then Quattro. So Quattro are the cans into behind me. Quattro is Canopy's first CBD infused sparkling water. If you haven't tried it, I'll step into a little bit about the attributes, but when we launched Quattro was during a really dense time of COVID for our nation. We had launched Quattro in Canada, and Quattro rocketed to being the #1 CBD sparkling water in Canada. But to bring that launch to market in the US just this past March amidst COVID, we also literally lined up that launch with the age of Aquarius, and we worked with Susan Miller. Google her if you haven't heard of Susan Miller. She's literally astrologist to the stars. And so we just wanted to hit on the cultural relevance of Susan, because Susan is someone who lots of people go to in their everyday life for guidance. And it's not to say Canopy Growth sidesteps the science, like not at all. If you're drinking a Quattro, you're drinking the finest CBD isolate. But we have to appreciate that Susan Miller brings like a cultural nuance when our lives were never more multidimensional with more complexity than balance. Susan received like the most new audience members to Astrology Zone, if you've ever been on it. So Susan literally helped us think of all of our Quattro flavors against an astrology sign in this age of Aquarius, in this yearn for a restoration of one's own balance, if that makes sense. And so I'll dig into both of those. Both of these launches, though, really tapped into the growing popularity of CBD and leveraged the accessibility, the appeal, and the trust of culturally relevant celebrities in this case. So that's what I'm kind of tying through as the common thread, who have mass appeal with consumer audiences who are still, in a lot of cases, they haven't even tried CBD for the first time. So, having a brand really recognize someone who is already speaking with these desirable audiences can really be, a smart and relevant and authentic foray into the space. So I wanted to pay off, how do you know a brand is successful in a culturally relevant way? And all I can think of to really get at that question is, a brand has really hit it and crushed it in a culturally relevant way when you have enhanced consumers' lives. And then, of course, I think, Alexis mentioned we're running businesses and companies here. So you also have to crush it on the scoreboard. So just really, really quick, back to Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart's a rock star, literally within 4 months of launch, and we're 8-9 months into launch now. Martha, my goodness, she's already a top 10 CBD brand, which took other CBD players literally 10 years to achieve what she did. And Quattro, similarly, as I mentioned, already being #1 in Canada and coming into the US, we have a broader route to market partner in Southern Glazers, which we announced a few months ago, which gives us route to market, a direct distribution access into as many states as CBD is permissible. So a little bit about the consumer piece, but as more strategic partners come on board, just the really vivid, I guess you could say points on the scoreboard to know that you're going in the right direction. Giving an example though, those proud moments, those in particular I admire, and kind of Martha and Quattro. Again, Martha and Quattro. Still hear me? I'll wave. Can you still hear me? Awesome. Okay, I got that. When you're about to be super articulate and it says your internet is unstable, I was like, I better check. All right, so I'll keep going. I'll keep going. So I wanted to speak to next as the two presenters before we did. What are those really tentpole instances where these two brands really did something, in my opinion, admirable? And so I'll speak a little bit to Martha, and again to Quattro, just to kind of round things out. So what I'll say is, when Martha did something really culturally relevant was, there's many instances of, she did Squawk Box recently, but I don't know if you remember her New York Times article and her big splash last summer, fall, where literally she had a necklace of all the gummies. And she literally picked up that necklace and kind of tastefully bit 1 or 2 or 3 off the string. That was very provocative for the CBD wellness space. And so what was really interesting about Martha doing that is she was just really, codifying her supremacy in the CBD wellness space. And she was moving us, and I know we'll get to cultural shifts later. She was moving us from something that's maybe a little bit less approachable or unknown into the mainstream in a wellness way. So I'll call that out there. In terms of those most memorables with Quattro, what I haven't mentioned is that each Quattro can, it's a 12-ounce can, we've got in there the highest potency of CBD isolate for the price of any solution on the market. So I think listening to the audiences in play, as Alexa pointed out, and taking a look at what is relevant in that social listening, and it was really around purity of CBD and also high potency. So to have 20 milligrams of the purest CBD isolate across all these flavors is listening to that audience. And then also we had a launch campaign with Quattro that was called Reach for a Wave of Calm. And the visual assets were beautiful. Dana, I was smiling when you were talking about the Chicago assets. We literally have a gentleman sitting in one of the ad campaigns where he's almost gigantic size over a very chaotic, city of Chicago, but he's rising up from it all and finding balance through a Quattro in a very culturally relevant way as well. So when I saw the mural, I hadn't seen the mural before, forgive me, it's absolutely beautiful. Dana, I can't wait to take a look at that. I'm going to turn that over to Allison, but that's what I got.
Great. Thank you, Tara. This has been such a fabulous conversation to hear from the retail perspective, the wholesale side, different aspects of the cannabis industry. Before we open it up to audience questions, I had just 2 other quick questions for the group. One of them a little unscripted, but you all sort of talked about the context of the timeliness of these launches and how that plays a part in being culturally relevant. So in some cases, it was a social conversation that was happening, or it was a particular moment in time in terms of a holiday and joining a social conversation, or a mindset, to your point, Tara, around people's attitudes around wellness and CBD. So can you talk a little bit more about, as these brands evolve, how important is that timeliness to how you go to market? And Tara, to your last point around social listening, how are you making sure you get feedback from people and users to inform that?
Sure, I'll start, and no doubt my peers have perspective also. Thanks for bringing up social listening, because it's easy to say as we elongate in COVID and what will become post-COVID, it's easy to say that these products launched during COVID, therefore this, that, and the other thing. But that also presupposes that you have to continue to steer and steward these brands in a post-COVID environment. So the social listening aspect of it remains, precious, empathic, and opportunistic. And what I mean by that is literally we had launched Quattro, so the CBD beverages in Canada pre-COVID, if you will, or really appreciating a full entrenched COVID society. But when we were looking at launching Quattro in the US, clearly we had omnipresent COVID, but that doesn't give marketers, the false luxury of marketing in that way. So what we did with social listening is we really tuned in, and we saw that consumers, like never before, were taking control back. In a time of the unknown, in a time of the chaotic, a lot of people said, well, I can progressively own my health and wellness. I'm going to look at solutions I can do at home, maybe because I am a little nervous of going to the urgent care right now, or maybe I want to anticipate COVID and do things more progressively for health and wellness. These were not the original tenets of the launch program for Quattro, but listening to that narrative really helped us find a way in. And the campaign of a message was reach for a moment of pause, or we started to say, Quattro says things that other brands don't. So we started to acknowledge really how we were all feeling and how we were stealing back those moments of pause in a society that, I don't know if you agree with this statement, I certainly do, is that Quattro really disrupts functional wellness beverages and even beverage alcohol. But if we think about functional wellness beverages for a moment, can we appreciate that a lot of the marketing there really celebrates go, 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 drink this, get 5 hours more of this energy, do more, do more. Stop. Like, I think that type of sentiment got us where we are, and we won't emerge from a COVID dense environment if we don't acknowledge that the past brought us here and we do things differently going forward. So Quattro said, hey, wait a minute, when did it become, not completely supported in culture to take a beat? Just take a minute. And so Quattro coming out with that message was juxtaposed with this almost evergreen message of drink this, get more, do more, be more, do, more. And Quattro was like, enough of that, because people are burning out. Like, it's okay to consider mental and physical health and wellness and take a beat here and reach for what we got, because we're saying something different. And I'll pass it to my peers. No doubt they have thoughts.
Great. Dana, did you have any thoughts on the timeliness of the moment and how it impacts your brands and how they go to market?
Yeah, so I love everything that Tara said. Just kind of I guess I'll call it entertaining now. At the time, it was not. But as I mentioned, Good News is a brand all about inherent sociability, and it's really like one of the biggest things that we talk about with the brand. So I kid you not, the brand was set to launch with a full campaign March 2020. So we all know what happened March 2020, but you think about just, if you're not listening, what that could have meant for the brand. And as we think about taking a beat and really listening, we paused the launch. We're like, well, if we launch this brand as is with everything we had planned right now, it will just come off as super irresponsible and very irrelevant. So taking that beat and really listening to what's going on And quite frankly, I think once we were able to launch, I think we even used the copy in some places of us, like, we're planning on launching a brand called Good News. It's all about positivity and sociability. In 2020 was like, hold my beer, where it was like, we just leaned really hard into that message of like, yeah, this is a joke. We're all kind of in it together, and finding ways to address like, how can you be together when you physically can't be together? So it's fun finally being able to play around, and Pride was really the first opportunity we had to do that, of the togetherness that we always intended to talk about. But there was a quick shift that happened, and it really came from what Tara mentioned, which is listening and paying attention to what's going on to make sure that you maintain relevance.
Great. Alexis, any builds from you? And then we'll take a couple questions from the audience, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Tara and Dana, definitely super helpful insight, and I would agree with that. I think there's definitely a sweet spot in terms of timing, dependent on what it is. Certainly, Dana, that's I think so many of us went through that process of like, oh no, we had, so many different things slated for this year. Good campaigns take time to kind of build assets, and good timing as well, and planning. And sometimes life doesn't always go that way. That being said, too, if you're a brand that also as Harborside does, right? We kind of pride ourselves on, being culturally relevant, being advocates and things like that. So there's certainly, when you have campaigns and things slated, read the room, right? Get a feel for what's going on. But also silence is also a statement as well. So, particularly on the PR side, or on the press side, when responding to certain things that happen. And I can think about, again, back in Oakland when everything happened around George Floyd. It was kind of that conversation where we had, over the weekend on, how do we want to respond to this, and then also what do we want to do around this? So there is kind of that sweet spot in terms of timing and sensitivity. And so, again, as we kind of said earlier, right, the awareness function is there, but then I think the real ask from a lot of what I would say, Canna conscious consumers who really, have an expectation now of brands to respond and really kind of see, how their consumers feel about a situation, is to make sure that you are also being responsive and kind of ahead of the curve in that type of situation. So, read the room, making sure that you're responding in kind of a timely way in that sense.
Great, thank you. I have to remember also, as a brand, sometimes we're inadvertently a leader, right? In the cultural conversation that you've joined. So certainly more pressure there from a marketer perspective. I have probably 100 more questions I would love to ask this remarkable panel, because there's so much fantastic experience here. But I will turn my microphone over to Brian, because I know we have a few audience questions that we'd like to touch on.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you, Allison, for leading and moderating this conversation up to this point. I think you took it exactly where a lot of the audience members wanted to see it, and I really appreciate all of the panelists diving deep on their specific elements of the program as well. As mentioned at the top of the hour, we want to have these be as interactive and engaging for your audience members as possible. So thank you all for the 4 questions that have been posted so far. We've still got about 10 minutes left. We can extend a few more to get those questions in, so don't be shy. Post them to the Q&A board. We're just going to go in chronological order here. So thank you, DJ, for posting a question later in the hour. DJ asked, specifically trying to nail down on some metrics and some specific tools that they might be able to take away from today's conversation and implement into their development of campaigns. DJ asked, how and what type of data do you collect, specifically metrics that you generate to determine the success of these campaigns and initiatives? I know cultural relevancy might be a hard thing to just nail down specifically, but are there any metrics or tools that you'd be able to share with the audience members about how you gauge the success of these programs specifically? And feel free to jump in, whoever wants to take that. I should have directed it to somebody first. Tara, it looks like you might have a comment that you wanted to dive in for.
I'll try to keep it to a sentence or two. The Quattro Reach for a Wave of Calm campaign, we're collecting state level metrics on doors for distribution. So we're collecting that through audit with key distributors. So we know that we have access to the physical brick and mortar and then also e-com. So we collect doors. Within the doors environment, brick and mortar, and then also e-com, we are testing a media playbook and an influencer PR playbook timed differently so that we can look at each tactic specifically. And we're looking for, obviously the product is in physical availability where we do these market tests. And we are looking at collecting velocity data. A lot of our distributors collect in-store POS, and we use that. We make sure that we have physical availability of our brand before we do a market test. And we look at lift assumptions on unit velocity with those media tools in market. And we look to test first, and then we platform from there in order to increase our spend. So we're looking at physical distribution, brick and mortar, and E as well. And then within having physical availability, we're looking for velocity metrics. We collect that from our distributors, but we do also have bright field data. We do also have IRI data, and we have customer POS data. And I hope that kind of gets at your question. The bright field data in particular has been so highly beneficial. Like, for example, the bright field data is what told us that CBD beverages, for example, would be one of the fastest growing segments within the entire CBD category. Brightfield data told us that a third of, it was on one of my earlier slides, that a third of consumers who purchased Martha Stewart CBD had never purchased CBD before until Martha, trusted advisor, and now they're staying. So that was foundational. And that we learned that once a new user of CBD comes in, almost 60% of people use CBD every single day. So grabbing those data sources against those setup KPIs of physical availability and then driving mental availability of the brand with activation was key.
Fantastic. I think that was exactly what DJ was probably looking for. Okay. Does any of the additional panelists have anything to add onto that about some of the tools or metrics that you all to use to gauge the success of your all's campaigns?
Yeah, I can go ahead and jump in as well. I mean, I think for us and for those of you that are kind of looking for the retail perspective in terms of how we're kind of understanding success, right, is to Tara's point, is kind of velocity. So, you know, when I had mentioned that we're kind of creating shelf spaces for those of you like Cresco and Dana, right, when you're looking at different dispensaries, oftentimes you're kind of met with shelving fees, kind of placement fees, to really figure out how to optimize your placement within the store. And I can tell y'all that, you know, it works, right? Those that do participate in certain kind of shelving or things like that, more visibility of your brand in front of customers and point of sale does help increase not only the visibility, but the sell-through. And so Harborside, when we're kind of adding these brands and we're giving them priority placement, we're not only doing that in our retail locations, but we're also doing it across our own media as well. And so you can see when we do highlight the brands in email, social media, SMS, you're kind of funneling them back, creating kind of that sticky touch point with your consumers, and then funneling through that like e-commerce model. You see about, you know, at least on our end, about a 25% uptick in volume. And then anybody that does, we do hosted banners for those brands on our e-commerce site, which, you know, by the way, for cannabis retail is super exciting, the fact that we're heading in that direction. But it works, right? You're kind of optimizing who's actually seeing your brand based on kind of buying patterns, and brands see anywhere from a 40 to 60% lift in sales. And so it was a really cool way for us to not only highlight those brands, but we saw that in kind of the uptick in traffic and engagement and ultimately sell through in our stores.
Yeah, and then I would just echo a lot of what Tara and Alexis just spoke to, and they talked about how you kind of measure with the consumer pull through as well as the shopper pull through. What I'll add to that is we often also measure like what our distribution looks like and engagement for our customers. So people like Alexis and our Harborside and our other dispensaries, to understand our dispensaries participating in our programs, what parts of the program are they responding well to, just to make sure that we're building programs that have that mutual benefit for us and our trusted partners. So that's the other thing that we're looking at as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for that well-rounded explanation to that question. I think each of you touched on a different tactic that is going to be really useful for the audience members there. Thank you again, DJ, for that second question that you posted here. I do want to be mindful of having the other audience members input here. So we're going to go to Kent's question next. If we don't have enough time to readdress your question, DJ, do know that we'll use it as a starting off point for a post-podcast conversation inside of our members-only community platform, NCIA Connect. So I think that might be a great launching off point for that conversation. So Kent Thomas asked a question, in order to make an authentic connection, how do you find out what your customer feels is culturally relevant versus what brand marketers think is relevant to that brand specific culture segment? Let's go with Tara. Did you want to start us off there again? Anybody else, feel free to jump in though if you want to.
Yeah, I can take a pause, or Dana, Alexis, do you want me to dive in? I can dive in. Okay.
Perfect.
In terms of what our retail customers think of as authentic, we are doing integrated business planning with our top customers, so IBP. Our top customers are obviously, key players like, Vitamin Shop. I mentioned Southern Glazers, and the list is plentiful. And the importance of integrated business planning helps us plan further out with our customers. And we go back and forth. We share trend data, because I mentioned before when I was asked about like metrics and KPIs and where we're getting data, I find as we move into normalizing cannabis that a lot of us, and I think my peers said it as well, we're grabbing data from all sorts of places. So we try to bring all of the pieces to the conversation and ask that our retail partners do it too, because we want to make sure we're like literally on the same page or table or stratosphere, and ask for kind of an information or insight sharing. And then we try to really together align on what are the major themes. And we work together with our retail partners. I'm super curious, Alexis, your perspective on this, because through joint business planning, we think about what those insight themes are, and then how our retail partners can be unique for their own market share goals across the retail environment, so that we can show up with common brand threads, but that, as most marketers desire, we don't want to be matching luggage everywhere. You've got to show up in a relevant way. And so we share insights back and forth. We share customer calendars. So I think about Southern Glazers. I think about the banners that they represent nationally. They have marketing calendars annually for key tentpole events that are regionally relevant. In addition to regional culture, there's tentpole activations that retailer stands behind, that we want to leverage that retailer's look and feel, so that we almost reskin our brand proposition so that we just don't look like a bolt-on within a retail's customer strategy. So there's the back and forth of the insights. It's almost like leadership on the foot of humility, going, I have these things that I'm hearing in the market. What are you hearing? What are the themes? And then how do we think about how we can partner to be distinct and show up in a way that doesn't look like a bolt-on?
Fantastic. Well, Alexis, Dana, Allison, did you have any additional insights on that specific question? If not, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Allison to lead you all in a final thought segment.
I just really quickly, Tara, I think you're right on that, right? And the way that you kind of brought that up, it kind of makes me think, dependent on where you're at in your business, your consumers can be different people, right? So in Tara's case, right, her consumers are her partners and her retail partners, in addition to her consumers as well, customers. So I think when kind of understanding that there's kind of different approaches, you could also be a consumer for you could also be your distributor, as an example. And, earlier I had kind of spoken on that unique selling proposition. When you're really drilling down to understand what your consumer wants and kind of their psychographics, you can then kind of assume certain value propositions that are important for them, cross-reference that with different kind of partners. And, when in doubt as well, right, it's always really important, and as a great engagement tool to ask. Like, we get our customers that will kind of give us feedback. They will reach out. I think folks in cannabis are very opinionated, very passionate about that. So oftentimes they'll kind of let you know if you allow the channels of engagement to kind of open up there. So just wanted to kind of add that in.
Fantastic. Well, I think that was a great way to wrap up that question. So Allison, I'll turn it right back to you while we get our contact information up on the screen for everybody else to lead the panel in a final thought segment.
Thank you. And thanks for our audience for sticking with us and for the fantastic questions, and from our panelists for participating today. I will end us with a really quick fire question for everyone. I think we've covered a lot of territory in terms of what culture means and the importance to brands and brands' importance on culture. So as we think about this industry and how it continues to normalize, quick fire, one sentence answer from all the panelists to close us out. If you could see one cultural shift in this category persist or change, what would that be? And I'll start us off, but just by saying that, I would love to hear and see more conversations like this one among female executives in the cannabis space, and continue to see folks like all of you represented in this industry having these candid conversations. So I've started you off. I'm going to go in order of my screen. So Dana, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I'll give it a rapid fire. I'd like to see whispers turn into statements. I think still there's a bit of, yeah, I smoke weed, like a little bit under your breath still. And I'd like to normalize it to the extent, to the way that with your coworkers, you say, we're going to meet for drinks after. You could say the same thing about cannabis.
Fantastic. Alexis?
No, I completely agree with that as well. I was going to say to continue the fight of destigmatization in cannabis. I think, for so many of us, we've dedicated our work to really showing folks that this is something that can work for everybody from a wellness perspective, also as your nightcap at the end of the night to kind of relax. So to continue the conversations, the important conversations for everybody, and allow people to know that this is a safe space.
Fantastic. And Tara, you get the final word.
I was going to say 3 for 3. So thanks for having me on today and hearing from Canopy Growth. My 3 for 3 is similar to my peers, is then can we shift away from talking about cannabis as recreational, medical? Can we shift and talk wellness? Can we move there? Can we have an open dialogue around the mental and physical benefit of cannabis usage? Because I can just tell from the statements made is that cannabis is a tool for achieving balance in our lives. And as represented here today, you've got some prideful thought leaders in this space, and we want to see a shift in how cannabis is viewed. So 3 for 3.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. Brian, I'll let you close us out.
Oh, it caught me with the mute button. Well, fantastic. Thank you once again, Allison, for assembling this fantastic panel of female experts. I really appreciated you all having different elements that you all brought to the conversation, and then really taking the conversation to another level by diving deep in the Q&A section. I really think some of the tools that you all discussed in depthly during that specific segment are exactly what people wanted to hear after that amazing overview of all of your all's campaigns. So I'm really excited to hopefully look forward and dive deeper into similar subjects and topics later on down the road this year at some of our conferences and trade shows. So thank you so much, Alexis, Dana, and Tara specifically for joining us for today's conversation. Along those lines, I do want to make a quick mention to all of the members and non-members that are here joining us today that membership does come with some significant opportunities for either discounted or completely complimentary access to our 3 conferences and trade shows that are all taking place later this fall and winter in person in Detroit, Baltimore, and San Francisco. After today's webinar concludes, you'll all be redirected to a landing page for all 3 of these events. If you are a current NCIA member on the seedling level, you're able to log in and claim as many discounted $159 passes for all of these upcoming events. If you're one of the evergreen or blooming members that are joining us this afternoon, please note that you either get 2 or 6 complimentary tickets for all these upcoming events. So please do not leave money on the table and secure all of those passes today. All of you are able to utilize the code that you see here, NCIA Web 15, for an additional 15% off either those discounted or additional passes for your team members. This code will only be available for the first 50 people at each one of these events, so don't hesitate and make sure to claim those tickets before they are gone. The Marketing and Advertising Committee in particular, as all of you all know, has presented some amazing educational content and programming underneath of our webinar program over the last 16 months, and we are very, very excited to be showcasing some more amazing content hosted by this amazing committee at all of these in-person conferences and trade shows later this year. All right, and with that, thank you all so much for attending another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Huge thank you once again to Alexis, Allison, Dana, and Tara, as well as all of the other members and businesses that have made up the Marketing and Advertising Committee for this past term. Thank you all so much for participating. We'll see you all again next time. Thank you.